Hi, everybody. Welcome to Unpopular Front. I'm Ben Udishin. It's the voice for the left and loud. That's right. I'm back. I hope everyone is having a wonderful week, day, night, week, month, all the different designations of time. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about some uncomfortable truths that we might find ourselves in politics and just in society and culture and all these different places. And that's when it's like a meme, right? The worst person you know made a really good point, right? It's that onion meme or clickhole or what are those ones? And basically, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about how just because you might occasionally, very occasionally, just once or twice, end up agreeing with someone who is your enemy, does that mean that then that perspective is wrong? So, the reason I bring this up is there was like some dumb drama on Twitter yesterday where some like old blogosphere guy whose blog I read occasionally back in those days. I was reminded that I was considered an emo prog, which is kind of annoying because wasn't a big emo kid. Like guys even tried to get me to play in their emo band in high school, and I just could not do it. Not my thing. Much more of a sort of, I don't know, indie rock guy, I guess. Sure. Just I wasn't an emo kid, and they called us emoprogs. Emoprogs. Because I wasn't a prog kid. I wasn't into prog until a few years later, and then I got really into prog. Um, Emotional progressives. But that's a blogosphere thing I can probably toss in the garbage. But there was this conversation, kind of stemming, I think, a little bit off of this whole thing that I made a video about, which you can click on, about Elizabeth Warren and a part of her sort of story about when she was very young, she got pregnant and she like didn't have the complete like teacher certificate that she needed. And there also was, just as I spoke about much further in that, like the obvious real like struggles of working women and just all people who can get pregnant. Also, check out Ari's videos about being trans and pregnant. So many links. And about that, and then sort of the way that that story sort of began to unfold, and kind of how, in general, while maybe there were some vagaries used to help explain some of the inconsistencies or sort of, it's some issues with the story that some people noted. It's just maybe not being 100% accurate. Some people saying, oh, is that playing into a certain like presentation of her, and does this like play into a fear that a lot of people have that she will be misconstrued as being like sort of vague, being very politician-y in that way, right? And I think that some people who on my side probably went a little overboard, not in the fact that they were wrong, maybe in that, yeah, maybe she wasn't fired in the way that we think of, but it is definitely true that you may get, like these systems of oppression and the fucking class position of being a teacher who didn't have enough of the certifications. She didn't have a lot of power in that situation. So I'm going to let that slide. What I'm not going to let slide, though, is a thing that came up with this old blogosphere guy, Eric Loomis. I don't really know him very well, honestly. I was more of a Daily Kos guy, which is not very impressive. It's probably bad. There was this drama that happened about like saying that people from Jacobin magazine were like playing into the right wing hands because he made this point, besides like sort of just some weird some weird psychosexual shit going on with one of the Jacobin writers, Megan Day. I'm just gonna say that. But there's also a point that he made that I think is actually a really dangerous thing to be proud of yourself for. And that's that he made a point about how no one, no one on the right has ever taken, his narrative or his work to empower the right or to like be critical of liberals, I guess, to hurt the left as he was describing it, right? And he also he made this very dramatic point about, because I think he's a college professor, about how, oh my gosh, I don't see you guys, getting death threats, which, believe me, I'm sure Megan Day's gotten plenty of death threats online. She's a woman online. Never, ever talk about a woman online if you're a guy and act like you've gotten more death threats. That's like mathematically impossible. Part of this, though, that I want to go further beyond the just sort of like emotional outbursts, who's the emo prog now, emo lib, and about this point that he made that I think you can extrapolate to a lot of different stories that are going on right now, especially impeachment. This point that he made that, that he's like a real warrior because he said Wayne LaPierre should be shot and then got death threats. Which, I'm going to be honest. Yeah, I'm not a fan of the NRA either. But what the fuck you think was going to happen? You're a very public figure and you asked for the figurehead of a movement of crazed white supremacist maniacs who have, very little connection to reality. Yes, they're going to be mad at you. Oh, you're such a brave soul. That's not a part of a campaign, dude. That's not really... What are you making happen with that besides making yourself be victimized, right? And then he has the balls to go on and then say that figures sort of on, I guess, sort of the new left, whatever stage of the new left we're on. And this basically just means people who are pro Bernie Sanders. Not a very exciting designation, honestly. And specifically some people at Jacobin, but very specifically the one woman who he's very obsessed with. Saying that that they allowed for, arguments and media to help support, the right wing, or the right wing has never attached himself to me. And first, I don't even know how, percentage-wise, that's how much that's borne out. But I'm just going to assume, I'm going to take this at best case possible. And it's, what this makes me realize is that I think there is a real obsession among liberals of, in a way, that really, more than anything else in politics, mirrors conservatives. There was this great, I really recommend, I recommend you become a patron of every podcast that is good, including my own. But I really recommend you check out the Patreon feed for Street Fight Radio this month, because they are doing a series on shock jocks and sort of the shock jocks of the late 90s, early 2000s. And in the very first one, it went over one of the most influential, and I think maybe the one show with one person in particular who really sort of, I think, pre-configured the mood of so many people on the right and a certain kind of comedy that I'm not a fan of. But you can also see how oh, right, this is the kind of person who becomes hardcore MAGA from being kind of not really given a shit. And that would be the Opie and Anthony show. I think, what's his name? Anthony something. I'm not going to look it up. I didn't listen. My parents just listen to NPR. I'm the soy boy. Soy face. And he is psychoanalyzed by a great radio show guy who's like actually good, Ron Bennington, in a clip that they played on the show. And he psychoanalyzed him to this perfect degree where he basically described Anthony's politics. Anthony, far right wing guy. Look him up. Just listen to that whole thing. It's great. And he psychoanalyzed him so perfectly in that he said, that you're not a conservative, really. You're not reaction. No, sorry. He said, you're not a conservative. Politically, you're not like longing for the old days. You just hate liberals. And you are, sort of culturally reactionary because of that. And the reason why I bring that up in the context of someone like Eric Loomis and sort of a general sort of feeling that you can get online sometime of, oh, well, they also hate liberals, so I guess that means I have to like all the liberals now, kind of approach, is that I see a lot of folks kind of operating the same way. And I think this Eric Loomis guy is a great example, where it's more important that you have a group that you hate versus the sort of having maybe a specific project that you're actually working towards. That it's not about any sort of social creation or goals beyond sort of very vague ideas. It's that I am in battle with this kind of person, and anything that could be used that reinforces their worldview is bad. And eventually, you can see how that can become extremely caricatured. Because while, in specific, Anthony from Opie and Anthony is pretty fucking bad. Like, he's a real racist guy, bad in politics, like, it's sexist as you can get out. So, yeah, I don't agree with him. He's bad. But there's also a fact that I think you would be a fool if you're a liberal to think that you then have to, if conservatives are critical of the status quo, then that you have to defend the status quo to the hilt. That you have to basically like hang on tight and you just have to be whatever they're not. And that's also bad because that's a really easy way to lose because then they can just play you that way. So when socialists and leftists and radicals of all types are critical of liberal politics or the liberal establishment, yes, could those cases be made that they are maybe going on a similar thought path and possibly criticizing the same people that a right-winger would criticize? Yeah, it's true. Do you think, though, that when Black Lives Matter activists cornered Hillary Clinton, that was a bad thing? Do you think that when they interrupted Bernie Sanders' speech, that was a bad thing? Not necessarily. Do you think that when people are critical of the status quo, that is leaving people with more work but less pay, that is a bad thing? So like, if you are going to live that Eric Loomis life and you're going to just be obsessed with, and I'm putting him in as a stand-in. There's a lot of things like this. Are you going to be obsessed with how, I'm, fighting the right and they'll never, get one thing. I'll never agree with them on anything. Or even agree with the idea that one person has problems, even if your reading on that is completely different. Like, I don't have the same critical reading of the Democratic Party that like a Pizzagate person does, because I don't think it's a party of sex freaks in that way. I think they're just a party of capitalists. It doesn't mean that I think the same thing. And it doesn't mean that those feelings that some of these people have being driven to be like, I hate liberals or I hate, this thing. It doesn't mean that those feelings are always like may be wrong. Their understanding of the feeling is probably wrong. But there's a truth in that you just got to uncover. And I think it's really important that we don't just become so reflexive that we just give up on people, and we also just act like there is no problem when there is a problem, just so we can like all be kumbaya. The reason I mentioned impeachment earlier, and I think that's really important in this context because, I haven't really followed this shit very well, honestly. I listen to my news and, I get it, but I'm not like digging into it. And there was a story that the now controversial journalist Matt Taibbi wrote in Rolling Stone, kind of trying to make a point that I'm not even sure if I don't know. Again, this is me like probably doing what I said not to do, in that I'm afraid of making a pronouncement because what if it like kind of fits in partially with a right-wing narrative, right? But the thing is, in this impeachment story, there has begun there's some questions about sort of what is this whistleblower? Is it a single person? And more importantly, is it sort of a whistleblower in the same way as someone like Daniel Ellsberg or Chelsea Manning or Edward Snowden, right? Someone who did it not as an asset of a intelligence agency, not as a political operative, but as someone who essentially was like, oh, I see some bad shit, I'm going to reveal it at whatever cost it is to me. Now, maybe we just won't know because of the nature of this investigation, if this whistleblower is that kind of person. But Taibbi made a point in his article that people really overreacted to because they were just like, oh my God, you're just a MAGA chud. And he even commented that he was uncomfortable that Breitbart like retweeted his article, which is true. That is weird. And I would feel really uncomfortable. And I would be like, if they asked me to go on their podcast, I would be like, sure, let's talk about how you're like a website founded by like a racist cokehead maniac. And that's even before Steve Bannon got involved, And maybe that was, I don't know. And he made this argument, that there is an undeniable fact and has been present basically ever since we've had like an established intelligence apparatus, that there is something, conservatives took this term, the deep state, and so maybe we won't use that. I mean, honestly, it's just sort of the intelligence agencies, right? The CIA, all these shadowy kind of groups that have a lot of power, and if you've read about the Church Commission, have done some fucking bullshit across the world. And that's from like an anti-imperialist left perspective, You don't even need to be mildly conspiratorial because these are just things that have been laid out and are true. And the CIA has maybe restructured. It's definitely rebranded thanks to shows like Homeland. But its function is still very similar. And a lot of these people who are involved in this, they're humans. They have political interest of their own. They have goals that they wish to see accomplished. They have, they have their own ideas. And Trump is a fucking monster and is in some ways much worse than the CIA. But it's not, that if this whistleblower is just another asset in this sort of war that's gone on between different sort of interests about how to sort of use American imperialism. For the CIA, it's like to spread American power and influence. For Trump, it's about spending his power and his personal influence, both of which are bad, So if we are just honest with the fact that there are more interest here than just Trump bad, everyone else good, we might end up intermittently agreeing with people who agree with President Trump. Now, is this the end of the world? Does this mean we should not be critical of American imperialism? Does this mean we should not be critical of the CIA? No. Yet, I feel like this sort of Loomis approach and this kind of, well, no, I've never done anything that a conservative ever liked, is really, really short-sighted. Really short-sighted. Because a lot of people maybe aren't as plugged in. A lot of people aren't like, going to their, socialist book clubs or doing their anti-racist activism, Like a lot of people just sort of have these feelings of, well, this doesn't make sense. What's going on? And they also know that, well, CIA sucks. We've gotten enough messages. We know that imperialism has been really bad. And we know that things like the CIA have done some bad shit. And unless there's another message allowed to be put in there, if you're critical of that, you're going to fall into this QAnon deep state bullshit. So instead of being so worried about not upsetting liberals, maybe if we allowed ourselves to be critical of them and to note sort of where all the power actually lays, we can actually build more political power and organize people based off of their actual feelings and not telling them to shut up.